Welcome, welcome everyone to the fourth day of the HS Awareness Week Virtual Summit. On behalf of AHSID, I welcome you. And again, my name is Tia, if you don't know me, and thanks to everyone who has been here since the first day. And we're so grateful that you all could be here today. I want to take a moment to thank the sponsors of the summit. Thank you to UCB, Designs by Muriel, 100-Page Journals, Hydraware, Burt's Bee. I would like to welcome Dr. Erin Martinez, who will lead a presentation on sex empowerment and relationships. Dr. Martinez, we welcome you and we really appreciate you being here.
Thanks so much, Tia, and I'm very, very happy to be with everybody tonight. My name again is Erin Martinez. My pronouns are she, her. I want to just begin by letting people know this can be a really exciting topic for many people. It can be overwhelming. It can even be scary. And I think it's really important to make this a safe place. So I'm going to be offering information that I hope is applicable tonight. But if you need to mute because you just get a feeling like, whew, this is too much, if you need to kind of log off for a minute, please take care of yourself. My intention is to provide tools and information, and my intention is not to trigger anyone with information, but we all come to this content with different histories and different experiences. So I want to remind us that our best work is done in learning when we feel safe, and please, do whatever you need to take care of yourself. Just a little bit of background about where I get my information in terms of how I work with HS and interact with HS. I do not have HS myself. I have worked with this community for about 10 years now, and I work with it from a couple of different lenses, from a mental health perspective. And when we say mental health, I think that is kind of the big umbrella for mental, emotional, relational health. I also come at it as a certified sex therapist. So I think a lot about people's relationship with their body, relationship with their sexuality, and partnering and things about dating and communication and helping our body to feel the best it can. So those are some of the topics I'm going to speak about really specifically today. And I also come at this from a trauma lens. So I'm going to touch a little bit on the idea of medical trauma, and many of you in the audience today may hold other traumas as well. So I work with clients individually and as couples, and I also teach at the University of Michigan School of Social Work. So I get lots of opportunities to hear from people's experience about how HS is impacting their life, and that really helps me to grow. I try to keep my hand on the pulse of what is going on in the HS community in a few ways, both through from the medical lens and reading journals about new research, also in participating in the annual conferences. And also probably my favorite part is when I'm invited to be in groups like this, or in some of the really wonderful and productive support groups that are happening. So I'm going to share a little bit of what I have learned, and a lot of that is from my work with individuals who have HS and are living their lives and learning new ways every day to do that effectively. So what are we going to cover today? We're going to cover a little bit about the idea, just an overview of this idea about chronic pain and stress management. So the relationship of how pain and stress interconnect. And so sometimes we may not be able to necessarily dull the pain or even reduce the pain, but sometimes what we can do is manage the stress related to the pain. And that is something within our control. So we're going to talk not only about what that is like, but also how to communicate most effectively about and set boundaries around our health and stress. We're also going to talk a little bit about the relationship to our bodies and how to make communicate better with ourselves and our own bodies, talking about energy and boundaries and communication within relationships. And then some thoughts about navigating intimacy that are pretty specific. So when we think about this idea of intimacy, I want us to think about touch as not, I think that sometimes when we are experiencing pain or when we're experiencing shame about our body, we may see touch as an obligation in our life. And what we also know from a research perspective is that touch has the potential to have an amazing source of healing and to also to help us to regulate our bodies. So when we're thinking about touch in that way, we can see it almost beside ideas about medication or nutrition. And so what I want us to think about in intimacy is not just the idea of erotic intimacy or relational intimacy, but also intimacy as a form of connection, as a form of vulnerability, and the different types of touch. So we might think about affectionate touch or sensual touch or erotic touch. I think about how very primal touch is to healing us. So when almost any human being, I'm sure there's a few reasons this wouldn't happen, but when almost every human being holds a baby that needs to be calmed, it is universal that we kind of like rub the back or pat the back. We may even caress the head, right? And that kind of call and response that comes naturally, we sometimes unlearn this because of difficulties, because of traumas. And we unlearn it sometimes because of pain, because when we're in pain, sometimes our body pulls us back. We kind of like go into a shell a little bit. Also, I think that sometimes we isolate because of pain and because of the unbelievable responsibility of having to take care of an illness and to navigate the world with that illness. And so I want us to, just for the purpose of our talk today, be open to the idea that touch is a source of healing. And also, when I say regulation, I'm thinking of a lot of the research that is being done around stress management and health, and probably what our doctors don't talk to us enough about, which is that in order to bring ourselves into wellness, we need to make sure we're not always in the sympathetic nervous system. So that part of our nervous system that is in that fight, flight, fawn place. And touch is really a big, big part of that. It is the connection with other human beings most often, or the connection with our own body, that we send messages that say, you are okay. And so we don't just tell ourselves that, but we say that. So I know a lot of times when I'm working in a clinical space and things get kind of amped up, I'll find myself doing something as simple as kind of rubbing my thighs. And that again is very primal. It's a way that it brings calming into our system. You'll see if you watch children that are dysregulated. So they're feeling nervous, they're feeling anxious, they're feeling upset. They'll often, when I look in a classroom, they'll often kind of naturally do this rubbing. It brings calmness to our body. So that's what I mean by regulation, taking ourselves away from a frozen space or a heightened space and bringing ourselves into a calm space. We're also going to talk about this idea of pleasure instead of the idea of performance. So when we talk about sex, sexuality, intimacy, most of our world gives us very performance-centered ideas. And I think in order to have great intimacy and great relationship with self and others, we need to follow that more from a pleasure standpoint. And then finally, we're going to talk about how do you map pleasure for yourself and expand your sexual script. People may be overly familiar with this, but I always think it's worth mentioning because I think it's been so helpful when I heard this. I do have I have lupus, and one of the things that I have learned in my own life is the connection between stress and flares and illness. And that is not, please know that I am not suggesting that I have answers because of handling lupus that individuals in this community don't have or do have. I'm only making a kind of a reach across the aisle to say Spoon's theory has worked for me in this way, and I hope that it can be helpful to some of you. So what is Spoon's theory for those of you that may not have heard of it? It's this idea of setting boundaries, really, and thinking about an inventory of what we have to offer and what we're already working towards. So often in our world today, what we see happening is that sort of the same is considered equal, and equality is not about sameness. And so what we are struggling with for one person and what it takes to get through their day is very different than another person. And so if I woke up today and I'll just use me as an example, I didn't sleep well and I had some like a lot of achiness in my joints, and so that kept me from sleeping well, I'm kind of already spoons down. And if I have more pain in my joints, I might be another spoon down. And that's not supposed to make me sad or upset that I'm spoons down, but I can use that then to communicate to myself, what can you do with the spoons you have remaining? Well, it sounds like you are going to make dinner maybe and reach out to your mother and do this great talk within the HS community. And if I deplete my spoons, then I need to be aware I don't have any more spoons. So we don't just keep on operating at a deficit. And we can also use Spoon's theory to communicate with other people. So we can say, I work with a fabulous colleague, Shanna Katari at the University of Michigan. And Shanna has, those auto reply emails. On their email, instead of it saying I'm out of the office, it will sometimes say, I don't have enough spoons to reply right now. Here's what Spoon's theory is. And I would respect any message I got back, but when I get that, it does something different for me because it really allows me to say not only, oh, I can wait for a response. I want Shanna to take care of themselves, but it also says to me, you know what? How important is that response I'm getting? Because I want to value that other human beings in my life are taking care of themselves. And I think in the same way, Spoon's theory can be really, really helpful for other people in our lives as well. So you can find more about this on butyoudon'tlooksick.com by the creator. And I think that exactly as in the title of the website, like a lot of many of you sitting here today in this community may have already heard that. Like you may not feel like you can go to work and say, this is what's up with me, or feel like you can take a day off because like, how much is my pain? I don't know how sick I am. Like, is it okay for me to say I don't have the energy for it? Like it's actually kind of complicated to figure those questions out. And Spoon's theory is not all the answers, but I think it's a super helpful way. So let me talk a little bit more about our relationship with your body. And each of these content areas could be their own course, right? So please forgive that I'm kind of giving you a very big overview. So I'm calling this kind of unpacking and redefining. So the first thing I want us to think about is this term bearing witness. In bearing witness, the place, she's not the only person that's ever said it, but one of the researchers and theorists that I really have respected in my life is Judith Herman. And Judith Herman is an author and clinician that's worked with survivors of sexual assault and abuse and collective trauma as well. And in part of her steps to healing from trauma, she uses this term about bearing witness, that we have to bear witness to our own experiences in our body, in our life, in our stories. And I would extend that when others bear witness to our story, there is also a processing of the pain and a reconnection to self. So how, right? How do we do this thing of bearing witness to the story? We, one, provide names to it. So I like the term surviving or survivor. I think others in the HS community I've heard often use the term warrior, HS warrior. We are saying to ourselves when we get out of bed and we may look in the mirror, or we may look at something that's holding pain for us on our body and that's a symbol of pain, we bear witness in that way. This is what I'm holding. This is part of my reality. We also begin to restructure what that means. Is it about shame? Is it about something I'm hiding, or is it about something I'm telling a story about to other people in my life? It's even the meaning. Over the years, I've talked to people about who sees wounds, or how I look at my wounds, or what are the emotions I feel within myself when I see them. So these are just some of the ways that we bear witness to the story. And I also think it's really important I saw somebody's chat when we were logging in, and someone said, I just got a diagnosis recently, but my symptoms have gone on for a long time. And that is part of the story. Part of that individual who is, I'm sure, with us today, was with us in the chat, is holding a story that is about people not seeing, because they didn't have a diagnosis. So in some way, carrying something, a very, very heavy load that was unseen. And there's a history to that story. For other individuals, when I ask them, what is the first time in your life you remember a discovery that you said, I have this thing on my body, something is wrong, or I'm scared about it, or I don't know how to talk about it, or somebody else named it? Like, where is the beginning of that story? That is telling that story, make remembrance is part of bearing witness. Why is it important? It's not important just to make us sad and to bring up hard stuff, but it's important because it's a way of processing. And it is also part of building this redefining, building a new relationship with the body, because we don't want to continue to feel about our bodies the way we may have when we didn't have a diagnosis, or when we didn't feel like we could name it, or we weren't getting help from doctors, or we didn't know how to communicate with a partner. Redefining is about being able to process that pain and that difficulty and developing a new relationship. Also, we think about this idea of HS as a part of the story, and sometimes it feels like a bigger part of our life. And to the extent that it is your story, is your choice. But in reflection of your body, it's important to, when you think about the evaluation of even the simple question, if you ask yourself right now, how is my body feeling today? Where do you go within yourself to answer that question? And what pops up? And I think for many individuals living with HS, they kind of beeline as soon as they open their eyes to, where is the pain? What is my wound or wounds doing? And so that is an important inventory. And there are other elements of your body that also need your attention. So that may be, is there anything going right or feeling okay? Is there a headache? What am I doing to take care of the headache today? Going back to Spoon's theory, what sort of energy do I need to take care of this whole body? And when we think about redefining, we also want to honor this body that is carrying so much of our story and so much of our experience. So thinking about HS as a part of this whole body and being able to connect and recognize what's going on with all of you. I feel that it is difficult, and this is saying this and knowing that in many of the conferences, I've met phenomenal physicians with huge respect I have. And I have some of my own doctors that have helped me a great deal. And I think it's next to impossible to take part in what our medical facility is, at least here in the United States, and not experience some level of shame, misdiagnosis, and maybe even medical trauma. And when I say medical trauma, I am thinking of not simply experiencing pain related to medical intervention. I'm also thinking about not having enough information. I'm thinking about, somebody said in the chat, I'm so excited to talk about sexuality because guess what? It still matters in my life, even though nobody's talking about it. It's what doesn't get said in medical settings. It's being treated like a body or a wound and not a human and a person. It is having decisions made about your body that you don't feel fully informed about. You don't know the outcome of it fully. You don't know what's involved. You don't feel like maybe you have a choice. Are there other options? All of these become traumatic events that take your power away from your body. And part of healing and redefining your relationship to your body is one, acknowledging that, and then also allowing yourself to get clarification. Sometimes we seek apology from people, but sometimes what we need is clarification to be able to say what was done to me was not right, whether we say it in communities of other people, or we, such as this space, or maybe we say it to sometimes well-intentioned providers that may have missed it, right? So many times people will say in a talk like this or in my office, like, what you asked me to focus on about my body was really triggering and overwhelming to me. The timing felt off. And I'll say, oh gosh, thank you. Like, I should have sought consent before I started that exercise that we were going to do. There is clarification in that process. That person is saying, here's what I needed was not where you met me at that moment. And again, that's an empowering moment for that person because they're able to say, I know what this body needs now. And I need to be the person in charge of that. And that's kind of a reclaiming effort from medical trauma. And then also making space for grief and loss. So I think that we often, in the HS community, there doesn't seem to be a place to put all the things that are going on. And there's so much that doesn't get talked about relationships or trying to make it through a workday, and employers that don't understand, and people that think we were talking about in a support group earlier this month, people that think they have the answers, even though they don't have HS. Like, have you tried this diet? Have you tried this? Have you like that? There's all these things you're carrying around. There's all these in the grief for what you wanted to have that you don't have, which is a body that doesn't experience pain, which is a body that doesn't carry this disease. And I think that I think people fear that they'll get lost in the grief. So sometimes they fail to acknowledge the grief. And I think that grief is less likely to take over our life if we can kind of say hi to it each and every day that it exists rather than ignore it. There's a modality called in therapeutic work, internal family systems. And it's this idea that we have like a little family living inside of us, and we have, we can name them, right? Like some of the parts are our protectors and some of them manage things. And I'll sometimes joke and say my snarky 17-year-old just came out. Like, I apologize. She means well, right? But when we think about grief, it is carried in parts of us. And our purpose is never to make it go away, but to just simply say, like, I see you there. I see what you're carrying. And man, you're full of resilience. And some days maybe it doesn't feel like that, but your lives are different because you are living with HS, and you deserve to acknowledge that. Not only the hardships of that, but the strength you have as part of that. So when we're thinking about our relationship to our body, there's lots of different ways to work on this. There's, I recently, a little self-promotion, I recently wrote a book. And in the book, I talk about some of the ways to navigate some of these exercises, either with clients or on your own. And one of them is sort of what we would call a mirror exercise, but simply being able to see yourself. There's so much very negative thought process in our larger culture about how the body should look, how a vulva should be trimmed and tucked and perfected, and how a penis should be a certain size. And so this sort of like genital shaming culture. So this is work that existed in the UK, created by an artist, Jamie McCartney. And one of the purposes of this, it's about 300. These are ceramic casts of people's vulvas. And the purpose of the art was to show beauty, and beauty in the diversity of shape and how everybody is different. So it's actually called the wall of vagina. And I think it's called the wall of vagina because people are more familiar with that term. They're not as familiar with the term vulva, which is referring to the outer parts of our, our labias. I think that this, to me, is a very beautiful effort. And I feel like it's refreshing when I look at it. I also encourage people to look at themselves when they're ready and able, and to think about what this means to you at this moment that you're looking at your own body, and what it would take, how far reach does it feel to look at this part of your body and feel a sense of gratitude or a sense of joy or a sense of acceptance, whatever that word may be for you. I think is very meaningful. I think it's also can be really overwhelming. So I always encourage people to start with parts of their body that they feel like the relationship is a little bit easier. So for me, I really like hands. I like my hands. And so I would start my journaling activity with my hands, and I would look at my hands for, maybe kind of like 2 or 3 minutes and just kind of study them and think about also the history of these hands, or what have I done with these hands that have made me proud, and what do I not like about my hands? There's sunspots on them now, so I wish they didn't have those, but can I accept them? Like, what do they say about me? They say that I spent a lot of time out in the sun having a good time. That's kind of a good thing. So I might work from my hands and then move that into other parts of my body that are maybe more challenging. And I think that's a really good a really powerful exercise for people. This is a similar project. This is work by Laura Dodsworth, and it's called Every Penis Has a Story, with some of the same purpose, like size, length, girth, shape. All of these have stories about people's value associated with the look of their penis, and has very little to do with actual sexual pleasure or body pleasure. And so how do we begin to reframe this within ourselves and not judge ourselves as sexually beautiful people by some of these really harmful messages that are held in our larger culture? Okay, so I've provided a couple of ideas there in terms of, and I'm just acclimating myself with time for a minute here. In terms of body and relationship. I mentioned a little bit earlier this idea of touch as co-regulation. And I think that if you are interested in learning more about this, there's some really approachable material if you simply Google or look for resources on polyvagal theory. It's POLYVAGAL. And this is the idea of how to regulate our body. So it's a really important tool in terms of stress management. I mentioned a few minutes earlier that affectionate touch is one of those ways to regulate. And other ways are the tone of voice. Also, our facial expressions regulate or dysregulate one another. And then I think in relationship, how are we doing things like something I do often with clients and I do with kiddos too is like palm to palm contact and just sometimes making eye contact. And this is found to regulate. A hand on the shoulder really regulates. It's the warmth of another person. It's the calmness of the touch. It's a sense of groundedness. Yes, there's tons of research on this. Yes, as simple as it seems, it actually does bring your body into what they call the ventral space, so away from an activated sympathetic nervous system or what we call a dorsal space, which is kind of that shutdown. It's a big risk for people with chronic health conditions because they're like, we learn to try to ignore or numb out sensations. And so we want to bring it into sort of like the ventral space. So if we're thinking about intimacy and relationship with our body, really getting into the practice of like, how is my body feeling? And then also using like these simple forms of touch to practice co-regulation. That's not even my dog, I apologize. Okay, moving forward from that, I want to think about the different types of touch. So I find that most of the time when we think about touch and I say the words sexual or sexuality or intimacy, most people, may not be you, but most people go to penetrative experiences. They think about often penis and vagina sex. They may think about taking clothes off. And what I would invite you to begin thinking about, and if you are in relationships or thinking about dating, to start to talk more about different types of touch related to sensual and erotic. So just a slide before, I kind of introduced you into regulating an affectionate touch. So we can do affectionate touch with lots of different relationships, right? We do those sometimes with children or with pets, or we do those through hugs and caresses. We're thinking about sensual touch. We're focusing more on sensation. So we're thinking about things like temperature, the pressure, taste, sound. So we think about our environment, but we also think about how those things wake us up or calm us or activate us. And we use them to our advantage. So we think about if I'm just going to kind of do a practice of like talking to a partner. And if I said, kind of a few spoons down, and because they know spoon theory, and I know what I'm in the mood for is being close. Here's how I want to be close. I would love to maybe cuddle with be able to have like a nice cool fan aimed at us, some dim lights. I would love like a coconut smelling candle. I would love, and I might start to talk about the type of touch I want. I would love to touch you here. I would love to be touched this way. And do you hear how it doesn't necessarily need to sound like I'm providing like a manual to someone, right? But I'm thinking about what makes me feel good and alive and how that meets with kind of the mood or the energy I'm in. And it is not trying to lead for this specific example. And I'm talking to my pretend partner in this moment. It's not supposed to lead to something else. It's focusing on what my senses want to feel at that moment. There's a wonderful activity that we use as clinicians that we call sensate focus. And that's the idea of practicing mindful touch with a partner. And the purpose is not arousal. The purpose is learning new things about your information system, about your body. And for most people that try sensate focus while they're in sex therapy, I find it really interesting because they learn more about their own body than they ever knew they would. They thought they were trying to learn about what their partner enjoyed, but they learn more about themselves in that process. And I think it's really exciting. Erotic touch is more the touch that brings us into a sexual space, and it explores elements of power, adventure, the unknown. It may incorporate fantasy, and it may test limits or what we might call edging. So to take ourselves far and then pull back a little, that kind of playful piece. So that is the erotic. And I think of that as an individual's sexual voice. Just checking the chat. Okay. So I mentioned this also earlier, this idea of pleasure versus performance. And I think that this is, if nothing else you take from today's talk, I really hope that you're able to think about how do I rework this in my mind. When we're thinking about performance, we're thinking about how do I get to an orgasm? Did I get to an orgasm? How good was the orgasm? How long did it take? Some people really get caught up in, I think porn culture really celebrates like squirting, like am I a squirt or did I squirt? It's a focus on penetrative activities, how wet somebody is, how much they lubricate, how long somebody's erection lasted. It's the physical function of sexual behavior, and it is limiting. And it is not particularly helpful to test our bodies or push our bodies in those ways ever, but especially when we're managing an illness, a disease, that it is a way of scoring our body that is harmful. So I would like us to throw that out if we can. And I would like us to begin a sense of thinking about our sexual selves as an experience. What experience do I want to have? How will I feel satisfied, and what joy will I find if I share this with someone else in satisfaction? How do I ask them about that? How will this experience make me feel better about myself? How will I feel more woken up, more alive, more comforted, more excited, more informed about myself? And what will be new or adventurous or peaceful about this shared erotic pleasure? So there's nothing about any of those other measurements. And this becomes when you're able to talk to yourself in this way about pleasure, you begin capable of talking with confidence with other people. And I promise you, when you talk about sexuality, sexual experiences in a pleasure stance, people will be like, oh, okay, yeah, sorry, that's a lot bigger than the limited performance-centered ideas. So let's think a little bit more about some other ways to communicate. Getting into my coffee now. Why are you engaging in sex? So here's the thing. We are taught at an early age that some people are taught you love someone and that's why you're trying to have a child. Maybe it's a faith-based idea. The truth is, I think it's, there's an article I think called 286 and counting. It's some research, I think it's out of the Gender Studies Department at the University of Michigan, I believe. But they just asked undergrad and graduate students, like, why do you have sex? And people just began answering. And there was like, in just one day, they got over 280 answers. People have sex and for different reasons, and they're not wrong as long as they're consensual, as long as they're not harming people. And it's important to be honest with yourself about why you're doing that. Sometimes it might be because I think we have a better conversation afterwards if we do this, or because I need somebody to see me, or I need somebody to touch me, or it helps relax me, right? Whatever that might be, but it's two-part, right? How do I communicate that honestly with myself? And how do I, if I'm involving another human being in that, how do I let them know what I'm trying to get out of that? Because what I'm trying to get and what they are trying to get might be different. And if we're clear about that, we're going to be a lot better off. So thinking about how do we talk about these ideas about consent are taken from the FRIES acronym from Planned Parenthood. So if I'm consenting to something, so let's go back to the here's the sensual experience I want to share with you. So it's nothing you got to talk me into. Like I'm excited for it. If I start hanging out and my body starts to feel uncomfortable, or I start to feel really tired, I can take it back. It's reversible. I was really specific about what I'm wanting to do, what I'm willing to do. And when I told you about it, I was excited about it. Like I even told you about my coconut smelling candle, right? I told you about like, I'm looking forward to how you're going to stroke my hair. That's enthusiastic. Like it's not begrudging. And it was specific. So I often ask my folks that have been married for 25 years, how do you practice consent? And they look at me surprised, like, oh, we don't have to, we just know that. But you don't. And you especially don't when your body is holding experiences of pain. You really need to be so specific about your consent. And I think also we need to think about what do we need to feel in that sensual or that erotic space. So what's the mood? What's the vibe? Where do you want to be? What's the space going to be like? How do you want to do this? I would suggest for individuals with HS that you think first about your environment and your context. You also think about the ways that you do want to be touched. And if there's areas you don't want to be touched, that you include that too, but don't feel like that is the only thing you need to get to, because it's very important to honor that you want to talk about how you do want to be touched. And that would fall under the specific as well. So also we have this thing that formally it's called the sexual excitement system. That's our accelerator, and the sympathetic nervous system or the inhibition system is our brakes. So when we have certain things happening with our body, they can sometimes cause us to be that person you drive behind on the highway and they keep on tapping the brake and you're like, are you stopping or are you not, right? It's a very activated inhibition system that gives the body a warning that says, I don't want to. And what I suggest to people when they have a braking system that interprets anything, whether it be a barking dog, maybe like if pain is on a scale of 0 to 10, a level 2 pain, or a stormy day, like you name it, everything kind of pumps that brake. Like, I don't want to be that way. I encourage them to begin trying to reinterpret what the messages are of the brake. So my pain is at a 2. Does that mean that I don't want to have any sort of sexual connection? Or maybe do I want to have something? The dog's barking and that's frustrating, but it might not mean that I have to pull away from that entirely, right? And it's also a way to realize that we're just different. So sometimes I work with couples that they'll refer to this as libido, but I don't think it's just libido. I think some people actually find stress to kind of hit their accelerator. So when they're really stressed, it makes them more interested. Some people will say when they are in a place of recovery from surgery, that they don't necessarily want to have a penetrative sexual experience, but they may be more likely to want to be kissed, to want to be held. And that can be somewhere between the affectionate or the sensual. So something important to think about and navigate. And now I'm going to get even more specific. If you've come to my talks before, I may have talked about this because I love this as a takeaway tool. I think it's really important. Most individuals that have HS, in my clinical experience with them, will definitely label within themselves the red. And the red is like the no. The no is, I feel shame about this. The no is, I feel pain there, or I've learned not to like this part of my body, or it's so uncomfortable, or I don't think it smells good. And that's the no. And that a no is always good, right? A no is always fair. And what I am encouraging you to do with a body map is also find the other areas. So one of the problems in how we've taught how to be sexual and intimate is we think of it as a purely penetrative genital experience. What we know is the mind is actually our largest sexual organ. I have worked with people with paralysis that have had fabulous orgasms, and that's because they use fantasy. Sometimes people use elements of kink, but they aren't focused on this really limited idea. And so the body map is a way for you to learn about and expand what is the sexual experience for you. So I usually ask people that whether or not they have any difficulty, health difficulty at all, let's just take the genitals off the map for a minute, okay? And let's expand this and get you to thinking a little bit more healthy and a little bit more creatively, to be honest, about your sexual experience. So if you're doing this, what I would ask you to do is find any image. You can draw an image. What is important is that it's a front and a back. The first step is to identify your green light. So I like to be touched here. I love my earlobes. I love my toes, whatever that might be for you, you color it green. Your yellow areas are like, I don't know. I don't kind of feel any certain way about nipples or my lips. It's a negotiable. Or red, like I can't handle touch here. And you don't even need to explain that. That's just, I can't. Then bigger challenge, the order of events. So go back through that body map, front and back. Where, if you had your ideal sexual experience, where would you want to start? Where do you want to go next? And so on. 1, 2, 3, up to whatever. And then third layer, how would I describe how I want to be touched in those spaces? A good way to use this is the back of your hand, because it's a really like thin skin. So you can just kind of think about like pinches and rubs and tickles and different types of touch there. And then finally, you can add to this practicing talking about this with someone, or if you are in some sort of relationship, actually sharing some of this information. I'd also like you to consider what the sexologist Jack Morin in his book, The Erotic Mind, talked about. I hear it called more in TikTok and a couple other places, the erotic blueprint, but this came from Jack Morin's work called the erotic template. And what he asks in the erotic template is a series of questions, more than I have listed here, but a couple to begin to think about for yourself, because everybody has a different erotic template. It's what gets us excited, aroused to that special place. Consider what would be your peak sexual excitement in your life. Think about who is involved, where did it take place, and what emotions were involved. These are important elements because different things get different people feeling in their most erotic space. For some people that might be hiding, and for some people that might be being seen, and other people's it's secrets, and for other people it's fear. And it isn't always about happiness or love. And so it's being able to carve out and to understand what your erotic template is, and then beginning to see, how do I pull that template into future experiences? And then finally, thinking about how we expand the script. So specific to, I know one of, in the introduction of the talk was sort of like how to have penetrative sex. If I'm specifically giving a talk on how to have penetrative sex when you have HS, the first thing I would say is, why do you want to have penetrative sex? And ask you about that. I would also say, explore lots of different types of lubrication to ensure that there is lots of lubrication involved. I would also say, think about beginning small, beginning with yourself. I work a lot with dilator therapy with individuals who have experienced pain. So if you have a vagina and you're thinking about having penetrative sex and you have had surgery or you are healing, I would think about starting very, very slow, beginning with tips of fingers, beginning with a really simple, maybe even a sex toy that is very, very narrow, and making that an enjoyable experience with a partner, but starting very, very small and easing into that and just trying to go very slow with your pacing. I, most of the time as a sex therapist, really try to encourage people to move away from thinking that penetration is the only experience. I love this couple. This was in a talk I gave about kink and BDSM. And this is both them in their sort of like ordinary everyday life, and this is them in more of their leather gear. So I think for a lot of people, figuring out on that spectrum of kinky, if they fall somewhere into that, because it has a lot of opportunity for exploration in terms of these emotional pieces of our erotic template, it helps us think more about how do we use elements of play and adventure and power. And sometimes for some people, that may also involve elements of pain, but doesn't always. So this is one of the reasons I've kind of listed BDSM as separates from kink. So that stands for bondage, dominance, sadomasochism. And kinky is a larger umbrella that would fall into. So for some people, they might say, my erotic template is I get really, really excited about the idea that like the blind is open a little and we're having sex near it. And maybe somebody thought I was doing something naughty in here, right? And that's exciting to me. So that could be seen as a form of kinkiness. And I would also say, as I mentioned before, the idea of sensate focus and being able to think more about mindful touch for couples can be very, very useful. Thinking about how you can expand the idea from affection to sensual to your erotic and expand your idea of sensuality. So I also do want to share, this is my email, if you do not want to post a question today, maybe you're feeling shy, but something is striking you, feel free to reach out to me. Please give me the grace of a few days because I do have an ugly looking inbox. I also wanted to let you know about this book. This is really written about the topic of making sex therapy and information about sexuality more accessible to all people. It is more of a clinician's guide, but if you are interested in topics about that we have touched on today and you want to dive deeper into some of those exercises or ideas, they are covered in the book.
Thank you so much, Dr. Martinez, for that comprehensive presentation on love and sex and relationships. Really appreciated you so much. We have a few questions. How would you recommend explaining HS to a new gynecologist?
So I'm going to assume in this that the gynecologist has no idea. And I'm going to be a little sad about that, that they have no idea. So the first thing I'm going to say is, hi, I'm glad to start our relationship. It's really important for me that you understand HS as something that I am living with. And I'm just going to give you a really quick overview of, I would say, what HS is. But what I want to ask is, are you willing, if you're not familiar, to do some of that work in gathering the information? Pause. So don't ask me to put a gown on or get into any sort of position. Are you willing to do that work? Because that is not anyone's work in this chat, this group to do. So are you willing to do the work? And let's pretend that the gynecologist says yes, for sure. I would also say, here's a list of some providers I've worked with. And here, most importantly, here are some experiences I have had related to misdiagnosis. And as part of having HS, one of the things I've experienced is people have looked at my body and not understood what is happening. And I really need you to deeply understand and to ensure that I won't have those experiences here.
Well, I hope that helps, Alexia. Okay, let's go to the next question. From Felicia Parm. She wants to know, what are some tips on how to bring up HS in the dating stage, getting to know someone stage?
I love this question. Okay, so Jasmine and I have talked about this a couple of times over the years. And one of the things I say is that people should be tested a little. And I don't say that often because it doesn't sound very nice, but I think that you should put out a piece of information to see how people respond to something that's vulnerable before you put out HS. So I might put out something like, an example. I can't think of a good example. Okay, I might say, when I was younger, I had a lot of discomfort about my hair because people would always make fun of it and call me names about it. And so I still get a little like uncomfortable when people touch my hair. Okay, this would be an example. And I'd see how the person responds. Or it might be like my mom is struggling with this illness and see how the person, how do they handle vulnerability? The other thing, so let's say they pass the test. They say, oh my gosh, I'm really sorry somebody acted like that. And I'll really try to keep that in mind about your hair and I'll ask permission. Okay, I think great, you passed the test, terrific. Then I would say, I would like to talk to you about a health condition that I have. And here's what I would like in terms of response. And I'm just going to let you know ahead of time because people kind of goof this up. So make sure you let people know, do you want them to ask questions? Do you want them to say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry? Do you want them to just be silent? What do you expect in response? And tell that to them, because it also makes you think about, how am I evaluating this? And most importantly, I think, say it with confidence. And this is a hard part. Like, I would practice with a friend first and I would say, this has been a long journey for me. And so these are my words. This has been a long journey for me. I have this, it is a condition that will never be cured right now. They don't have a cure. So I go through a lot of treatments. I experience a pretty high level of pain. I've lived with this for quite some time. Sometimes I may even I consider different medications, and possibly some people with HS have to consider surgery. This is not contagious, but it will affect intimacy for me. And so I like this one. I need you to be a capable, confident lover. And I'm just kind of finding out if you have that. That would be the really saucy end. I'd love to see people give to it, but that's just an example.
Any tips for late bloomers? Same-sex relationship? Any tips for late bloomers?
I guess my first tip that comes to mind, that question creates more questions in me, but the first thing that comes to mind is pacing. So giving yourself permission to go slow in navigating new experiences. That's what I'm taking from the late bloomer piece, that you're entering in new. I also think, to me, when we're thinking about expanding the script, one of the things I recognize in terms of same-sex relationships is we didn't receive the information we needed to from peers or family or anyone about what is possible erotically, sexually in same-sex relationships as much as heterosexual. So I think I love books like The Guide to Getting It On, or Girl Sex 101. These books really talk about how do you expand the script in ways that are creative and gives you language, comfortable language to ask for those things. I think that's really helpful.
How does HS affect the genitals, like the vagina and penis? They want to know how that affects the genital area.
So if we're thinking about wounds, that is probably the most common. Also, if we're thinking about surgical intervention, many people have woken up from those surgeries looking very, very different than they went into the surgery with. So that may mean that they have a loss of some level of like the shaft of their penis, or some part of the tissue of their labia being removed. And if we're thinking about that, because of the intricacy of the nerve endings in the genitals, you're considering a huge amount of pleasure loss in that area as well. Certainly, I think anytime we're experiencing pain that is specific to the genitals, so we have maybe, a specific wound that we're taking care of on, let's say, the penis, that the experience of pain is going to cause a decrease in our ability to have an erection in most cases. It may make the erection more painful. And it certainly, anytime we have stress or pain, it also affects our level of lubrication.
And we'd like to thank you, Dr. Martinez, for showing up this evening. We really, really did appreciate your presentation. Thank you
It
so
was
much.
wonderful to be with all of you. Thank you so much.